Hello, everyone. Very happy to have you here with us. Today is Wednesday, June 10th, 2020. We're here on another event from NYJavaSIG. Very happy to have you here. Before a little game to play with our guests tonight. So to start with, maybe I can pass to my friend Jean. Jean, you want to take this?
Sure. We have a handful of questions for you. The first one I already asked in the chat. We're going to try to use a variety of channels for the questions. So we were seeing if there was anybody who it was their first JavaSIG. Now we're going to ask a question for everybody. Can you type into the chat what version of Java you use the most at work? If everyone posts in Java 14, I know you're lying. Victor's doing a commercial. That's not a version of Java. Okay, so we're just going to pause a little and let people enter their versions of Java. I'm starting to see them come in. This is all very good. Okay. At this point, we're going to go on to our first question that we're going to use Menti for. Menti is a tool where you can vote online. So I'm going to paste the question into the chat. Sorry, I'm going to post the Menti link into the chat, and we're going to ask the question. So our first Menti question is, how do you prefer to get your JavaSIG updates? And your choices are email from the JavaSIG, Twitter feed from the JavaSIG, or LinkedIn from the JavaSIG. And remember, you can choose multiple options. So if you want to find out from all three options, you can do that. While we're voting on that, we've very, very informally tabulated the results. And most people said Java 8 or Java 11 with a sprinkling of other things. I saw a 14 go by, and I saw a couple people that have installed or played with 14, but haven't actually gotten to use it at their employer. So that's our next step, to use what we learned today and get our employers all on board with using it. Checking the Menti results, I see people are starting to vote on how they'd like to get updated on their New York JavaSIG meetings. That's awesome because that's useful information for us. Now we're going to do two trivia questions. The first trivia question is about loops and removing things. So I said the link has the word mobile at the end. Okay. I see what he's saying. Okay, so anyhow, we have our first question. Our first question is about code. If you run this code, what do you expect to happen? Please vote in the Menti. We have a list with 4 elements: red alliance, blue alliance, go robots. And then we loop through that list of 4 things and remove each item and print out the results. So our question for you is, what happens there? I'm going to pause and let people vote. Voting, 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 voting. And I see we have a lot of sharp developers here because we have a winning entry. It is that this code does in fact throw a concurrent modification exception. That is awesome. We all know what's going on here. Now we're going to go on to our second question. And our second and last trivia question. We don't have much standing between you and the results here. Our second trivia question is that we're going to have some similar looking code. But this time we only have 2 items in the list, red and alliance, because we all know who's going to win this. It's the red alliance. We then loop through our list of 2 elements, removing each one, and print out the results. What do you think here? Let's see. The winning entry so far is the fire engine. Unfortunately, the fire engine is not allowed to write code. Our votes say that people think that this code also throws a concurrent modification exception. But alas, it does not. Because we remove one item from the list, red. The list is like, oh, cool, I'm done, because there's only one item in the list. It doesn't try to do anything else, and it prints out the remaining item, alliance. I hope you all enjoyed our trivia. Back to Rodrigo.
All right, thank you, Jean. That was really nice. Thank you. I hope everyone enjoy. I'm sure Jean posted a few questions here before. So if you are a first timer, please write in the chat you are a first timer. Write where you are from. We're really interested to know where you're from. Okay, and just want to also point the ways you can get in touch with the NYJavaSIG. So Twitter, our Twitter handle, NYJavaSIG, is the best way to get in touch with us. We're very active on Twitter. Our members are always looking at Twitter and answering questions. We post all the updates, future events, everything on Twitter. And here is our YouTube channel. Most of our past events are on YouTube channel. We have a lot of content. So keep in mind that NYJavaSIG was the first Java user group. We are 25 years old. So there's a lot of content to you there. First, I think that's it. With that,
What should people do if they have questions?
If they have questions, please use the chat to ask questions during our Q&A. Jean will be on our chat getting our questions. Our team is going to be answering or forwarding them to our speaker tonight. So please use the chat as much as you can. I'm going to introduce our speaker. So we all know that Java now have a release every 6 months. So that's changed a lot of things in the Java world. So our speaker is going to talk a little bit about those changes, about Java 14, and even the new updates now that's from the Java 15 that's coming. Our speaker, she's from Brazil, Loiane. She is a Java champion. She's a software developer for 14 years, if I'm not wrong, a Java champion. What else, Loiane? You have so many titles, Loiane. It's hard to keep. Please, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you so much for the invite. It's an honor to be here. Okay, so shall we get started?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen. See if that's gonna work. Okay. Let me see if you can see what I see. So today, what I have prepared for you is I have a few slides in the beginning just so I can introduce myself, introduce the topic, and then we'll go straight to the live coding, which I believe is what you sign up for. So let me, I think I can, let me see if I can do this, and then I'm just gonna present this so you can see it better. There's a delay for me, so if I look right here, I'm just trying to see what's in my screen and here are the comments that you are typing as well. So if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat as well, and then we can go through them at the end of the presentation. So hi, everyone. Welcome. So today we're going to do live coding for the Java 14 features. The idea today is to go through the roadmap of the Java releases and also talk a little bit about the feature releases and also the long-term support, the Java 14 overview, which is the main topic tonight. But of course, given the releases, we're going to have a few things that come from since Java 10 and then going through Java 11, 12, 13, 14, and a little bit of Java 15 as well. We're going to do live coding. So I have prepared here a project, a brand new project using Spring Boot. But even if you're not using Spring Boot, if you use Quarkus or any other Java framework, you're also going to be able to use these tips. the spring part is just so we have a base and we have somewhere to get started. And of course, we're also going to talk a little bit about Java 15 and the future. Java 15 is scheduled to be released on September. So there's a lot of good things for us to come. So my name is Loiane, as Rodrigo mentioned. I'm a software engineer at Citibank, and here you also have all my social media, so you can also get in contact with me on Twitter or on GitHub as well, or here in YouTube. If you want to learn how to program in Java, which I'm sure you already know, but if you want to learn Portuguese a little bit, you can also check out my YouTube channel. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about the Java roadmap. Since Java 10, which is about 2 years ago, we have a new release cycle. It means we have a new Java version every 6 months. And right now we are on Java 14. Java 15 is scheduled to be released on September this year. And then next year, we're going to have Java 17 also on September, which is scheduled to be the new long-term support release. This means that right now, as the first question that was asked today on the chat and you answered, most people are using Java 8 or Java 11, which are right now the long-term support. So most of the companies are still using Java 8, probably paying for the support from Oracle or from other companies that are providing this kind of support. We also have Java 11, and then this does not mean that we cannot use Java 14 or Java 13 or any other of the feature releases in production. You can, if you want to use Java 14 nowadays in production, you can. That means that the companies, Oracle and the other companies, will provide a long-term support, a paid long-term support, in case if you still want to use, for example, Java 8. But of course, Java is still open source. It's free. You can also use the Open JDK in your projects. So for Java 14, it was released on March this year. So a couple of 3 months ago. I already lost the track of time. And we do have 16 JDK enhancement proposals, and 4 of them are for the language enhancements. We have other enhancements as well. We have another one from the JVM, which is the helpful null point exceptions, which I love this one. But for language itself, we have the switch expressions, which is a standard feature now, meaning it's complete. We're not going to change it anymore. But we have 3 other ones that are still in preview. One is the pattern matching for instance of. This one, it's also scheduled to have a second preview in Java 15 in September. Records, also this is the first preview. Second preview is also going to be released on September. And the text blocks also, it's scheduled to be a standard, meaning a complete feature, also on September Java 15. So this is what I want to showcase you today. Usually whenever we go on the internet, we see a lot of blog posts showing, hey, these are records. This is how you use the text blocks. But how can we actually use all these functionalities in a project? How that will, what's going to look like? So let's go ahead and start this live coding. So just an FYI, what I have done here is I went to start.spring.io and I created a Maven project because I'm a little bit old school. I still like Maven. Java language, of course, because we're going to use Java. And then I entered my information here. One thing that is very important, you can also let me know if the font size is not good. Select Java 14, which is already supported. And here on dependencies, I just selected web, JPA, MySQL. I'm going to use MySQL database today. And also the JDBC, I'm going to talk a little bit about JPA, Hibernate, and records, and also JDBC, how we can still use records to access the database. And Lombok, I'm also Team Lombok. I know some people don't like to use it, but I do like to use, but feel free to use whatever you like to, whatever you prefer. So I generated my project. And then this is what we have. Let me know if the font is not good for you. If I need to increase a little bit more, I can do that as well. So let me see here, maybe 23, 24. I think that's going to be better a little bit more. Okay, so this is a plain Spring Boot application so far. What I have done here, this is still empty. So this is my only class, just the default Spring Boot application. I have also entered all my JPA Hibernate properties here. I also like properties file. I'm not a big fan of YOM. So I have my driver, my username, password, great password, not really, and also Hibernate. Just a hint that for the DDL auto update, because this is my development environment, which is fine, but it's also a good reminder to not use this in production. Okay, so let's get started. First thing, what I would like to do is start creating a RESTful API, because usually whenever we are creating Spring Boot applications, unless it's a Spring Bat, but if you're working with web applications, it's usually a RESTful API. So let's start with that. So first things first, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna start creating a plain Java class just to represent the entity, my table on the database. So I'm gonna come here and create a Java class. I'm gonna call it product because this is the name of the table that I have. And over here, I do have, I believe I created as a integer. So private integer ID. So this is gonna be my ID. I'm gonna add the ID over here. This is the persistence. Also, I'm gonna add my entity so I don't forget, and I have my ID. And I'm also gonna add here the generated value. And what I'm gonna add here is also the strategy, and the strategy is gonna be identity. So strategy, strategy type, identity. Strategy type, identity is strategy. Okay. I'm typing this incorrectly. I hate this. Okay, let me go. It's the generation type and then identity. Okay. And then I have here also, I believe it was a name that I created. And I also have another column that is an integer, and then it's status. So the reason that I have this status here is going to be 0 for inactive and 1 for active. I could create an enum here. I'm going to do that in a while. But first, I would like to showcase something later. That's why I'm going to keep this as an integer. So just reminding you that this is the same as doing this, and then we have like name here, but then we don't need this part. Because I'm using Lombok, I'm not going to create the getters and setters. I'm going to use the data Lombok. And one of the requirements for JPA is to have a constructor with no arguments. So no arguments constructor. That is no args constructor. And because I'm also going to be doing some testing, I'm going to create an all arguments constructor as well, but that's not required for JPA and Hibernate. We only need the no arguments constructor. So that's what we have. So just to try to remind you a little bit about the JPA requirements, we need to have an entity class. We need to have an ID or something that's going to represent the primary key. We also need to have the no arguments constructor, and we also need to have the setter methods. So we have a plain Java class so far, nothing new. This is still what we do with Java 8 in production and Java 11 as well, and all the other versions. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an interface, which is going to work as our repository. So it's going to be product repository, and this is an interface. This interface is going to extend the JPA repository. And then here I have my product, which is my type. And then I also have to pass what is the type of the primary key, which is integer. And here I cannot forget, because usually I forget all these annotations to add it later. So the repository here. So with this, we're going to have access to all our CRUD methods, which is the find by ID, the save, update, delete, and all that. So now that we have our class and we also have our repository, we're going to create a controller class. Usually if this was a bigger application, something that we're really going to put in production, I would create a service layer. So just so I can add all my business logic, but since this is going to be simple, and also this is a more educational example, I'm just going to go directly for the controller. So product controller, it's also my class. For the product controller, I'm going to add a REST controller, and I'm also going to add what is my request mapping. So we can test this in the browser. And here, what I'm going to do is just call products. So if I want to get all the products, I'm just going to call this my localhost port 8080/product, so I can get all my products. If I send a product/ID, also a HTTP GET method, I'm going to get by ID. If I send a post, I'm going to send a create. If I send a put, I'm going to be able to update. And of course, the HTTP delete, where I'm going to be able to delete just a RESTful API. We're not going to implement every single method here. We're just going to overview the ones that we can showcase the Java 14 features. Also, so far, nothing new. Before we get started, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create just a simple method, just a hello world, just make sure my program is working correctly before we start and take the next step. So first, hello. And this is going to be a get mapping. And all I'm going to do here is just return hello. So we can test this. Just make sure, because this is live coding, everything can happen, and then just to cover our bases. Meanwhile, let me take a look here. Yeah, I can push this source code to GitHub, and then you can download it later as well and try to run it locally. So here I have, what I have here is localhost 8080/products. Okay, it's working. We have our reload. We can continue with the source code. Okay, yeah, I'm seeing some people that do not like Lombok. Okay, so now let's get started. What I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna transform this into a list, and we're gonna get all the products that we have in the database. So I'm just gonna rename here to find all, and we also need our repository. So private product repository, I'm just gonna call this repository as well. And of course, we also need to private final. We also need to auto-wire this. You can use the auto-wired annotation, or if you want to do the dependency injection, we can also create a constructor passing the repository as a parameter, which is the preferable way. According to the Spring documentation, this is actually a best practice. And here, what we're going to do, we're going to return the repository.find all, and then you have all sorts of methods from JPA. And of course, we also need to change this to a list. And then I'm just gonna add here the response mapping, response body actually, so we can persist this information, send it back in a JSON format. So if everything is okay here, we should get the list of all products that I have in the database. And of course, I have to start my server because I stopped it before. Otherwise, I'm not going to get anything. The editor that I'm using is IntelliJ. This is a custom theme that I have installed. This is the Atom 1 Dark. You can also install it, but you can also use Visual Studio Code, which also supports Java 14. So products, and this is too much. So there we have it. We have this. This is JSON that it's returning. It's returning everything that we have from our database, and this is the JSON. So for now, everything is working. But as I mentioned, this is just the default code that we have, and we can have something like this using Java 8 or Java 11 or any other Java version. Nothing new from Java 14. So first things first, one of the enhancement proposals that we have with Java 14 is the records. And for me, this is one of the biggest enhancements for this release. Of course, we also have the switch expressions, which I love, but records for me is something that I want to start using today in my projects. And the reason why, and also seeing one of the comments in the chat, because if we go back to this Java class, this is a very simple class. We only have 3 class properties here, attributes. And usually in enterprise applications, it's very common for us to have 20, 30 columns in our tables or collections, right? If you are working with NoSQL databases. So we kept with only 3 just to keep it simple. But imagining that you're not using Lombok and you have to create all your getters and setters. Of course, you're going to ask the IDE that you're currently using to generate all the getters and setters for you. And then you end up with a B class with all that boilerplate code. It's basically code that you're not going to use unless you're really using the encapsulation concept and you are adding logic to your getters and setters. Otherwise, it's just a method that it's going to return the property directly, or you're just going to set whatever value that you're receiving in your setter method and assigning to your class property. So nothing new. So with records, we just remove a lot of that boilerplate code, because I'm going to create a record here just so we have the idea. I'm going to try to transform this Java class into a record. So I'm not good with names, so I'm just going to call this maybe product record, because I ran out of options here. So I already have my product, so product record. And one thing that is important, I'm using here record with a preview feature. So I'm gonna select this. One thing that I forgot to mention in the beginning is that in my POM XML, I have all my stuff from my dependencies from Spring. But also, if I want to use Java 14 with these preview features, which are the records, the pattern matching, for instance, of the text blocks, and I think that's it. We have to install these 2 plugins. So I'm going to use the Java 14 and I'm going to enable the preview. So if you're using Maven, you have to add these 2 plugins. If you're using Gradle, if you prefer to use Gradle, there's also a plugin for Gradle for you to enable the preview functionalities. And in your IDE also, you have to go to your project structure or whatever it's called in the preferences, select the JDK 14, and also select the language level, also set to preview, which is going to give you access to the records, patterns, and text blocks. So that's something that is very important. And I did forget to mention this. So if you take a look here at the record, we have this public record. It seems that we have the parentheses, which is a default constructor. So this syntax reminds us a lot about Kotlin. So if we're using Kotlin on the JVM as well, it's much, much more simpler. And this is the reason why I loved this record feature. And we can do something very similar here as well. So integer, I can have my string name and I can have my int status here. And that's all we need. With this, the product record with 2 lines, if I just remove this. So here, with a single line, we have the declaration of a record, which is going to translate to a Java class. So if we take a look here, we have this product, integer, ID, name, status, and of course we have the data. This is going to generate all the getters and setters for us. This is going to generate a constructor with no arguments, which is required by JPA/Hibernate, and also an all arguments constructor, which is something that I like to have. If we take a look at records, it's only 1 single line of code. Let me try to restart the server. So this project recompiles and it generates all the classes for us here inside Target. so I can show you exactly what's going to be translated to. So here we have our product record.class, and this is what I like about IntelliJ as well, because we can see this source code. So the product record, as you can see, I have a public final, meaning we're not going to be able to extend this class anymore. Class. So my record, the record that we created here got translated, got compiled into a class. And this class extends a new class from Java JDK, which is called the record, also part of the Java Lang package. We also have here an integer ID, name, and status. So it created all the class properties for us. One thing that is very important to notice here is here we have just a private integer. And here on the class, where is it? Let me close a few things here so I can find that again. Oh, over here. We have private final. This is a very important thing to notice, and it's gonna be important for us to try to understand the relationship between records and JPA/Hibernate, if we can use it or not, because this, I believe this was the first thought from everyone when we saw records. Okay, I'm just gonna refactor all my projects and use records instead of classes. So we also get a constructor with all the arguments by default, which is basically what we did here. This also serves as a constructor. We also get a toString, so we don't have to ask the IDE to generate it for us. You can override it, of course. We also get the hash code and the equals methods that usually the IDE also generates for us. And then we can, of course, just add our logic. And we get the setters. We get the getters methods. One thing here is whenever we are trying to add to get this property, we're going to use get ID. So we have the get prefix, get ID, get name, get status. If it's a Boolean, it's usually going to be is and then the name of your Boolean property. But here, we don't have that naming convention anymore. We only have the ID, the name, and the status, not get ID, get name, get status. So this is what we get once we create a record. So this is great. From one single line of code, we get all of this without us asking the IDE to generate any further code for us, which is great. Now, if we go back to the requirements from JPA/Hibernate that I mentioned at the beginning, that's why I wanted to mention to you the requirements is we need to have an empty constructor. That's fine, because here in records, we can create our own constructor as well. That's totally fine. We also need to have one property that's going to serve as our primary key and identifier. One thing that we can do, if you want to just organize here a little bit more, we can add annotations here to each of the properties. And if we try to recompile this again, and let me open the class here again, the compiled part, product class, you can see that no, not this one, my record one. We can see that we do have the annotation here, so we could use. The only issue is that JPA/Hibernate, they do need the setter method, which we don't have. Because it uses the empty constructor, it needs to have the setter method. And in case of records, we don't have the setter method. So that's the reason why we cannot use records with JPA and Hibernate. So that is a bummer. That's a bummer. However, there are still a few other things that we can do. Since we cannot use with JPA Hibernate, we can still use in our projects. And I'm going to show you also later a way that we can kind of like bypass this part of not using records whenever we are working to insert and also retrieve information from the database. That is correct. So records are immutable. Therefore, you cannot use them as an entity. So yeah, that's a bummer, but that's what that's what we have to live with for now. But as I mentioned, there is another way that we can use this, and maybe it can be applied to a lot of different projects. Let's go back to our controller. So now suppose that we want to create a new record in our database, meaning we want to insert an entity on our database. So what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna create a public. I'm just gonna return a product, and then we're gonna create a new product here. So this is gonna be a post mapping, and we'll see how we can use records in a different way. So, and here for the create, we're also gonna need a request buddy. And here we're also gonna do like a product, and then we use our product over here. And basically what we're gonna do is just save this in the database. So we can do repository dot create, no, not create, repository save, and then we pass our product over here. So this will be how we could save. Very simple code without adding any of the validations here. However, as I want to showcase how we can use a record here, what we're going to do, we're going to create a DTO. Of course, for very simple classes such as this one, we could use a JSON ignore notation here just so we could ignore the ID, but we're going to create a DTO just so we can see how we can use records. So I'm going to create here a product DTO. Again, this is going to be a record. And here, we don't need the ID whenever we are creating something. We don't have the ID yet, so we only have the name, and then we also have the status over here. As I mentioned, we can also add annotation. So if you like to, you can also use the Java Bean validation. So for example, not blank. So if it's not null and not empty, not blank. And here, what I'm gonna do, just for this example, the maximum is gonna be 1 since this is a number. And then this is gonna be a minimum of 0. So there it is. We have a DTO that we have created. Now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go back to my controller and I'm gonna replace my product with product DTO. Okay, so I have my product DTO over here. Because I have a different class, a different type, I need to transform my product DTO into my product class. We could use a mapper, and there is a great library for this as well. However, since I want to showcase you something, we're not going to use that. So I'm going to go back here to my product DTO, and I'm going to create a method here. This means that we can also create methods and add our logic to records. So public, this is going to return a product. So to entity, something like this. And basically what I'm going to do is return a new product. I'm just going to pass null here because I don't need that. And then I can enter the name. So this, and I can call the name and this and call it status. So these are the getter methods. And there it is. Just remember, you can use a mapper for this, so you don't have to do this manually. And here, what I'm going to do, product to entity. So as you can see, besides all the properties, the class properties that we have declared, we can also have methods. Other things that you can have inside a record, you can also have static properties. So if you want to insert like a count here, we can also do that, a static count. We can also have static methods inside records. So that's basically it. Let me open Insonia. I don't think I have it open right now. Let me see if I can open this real quick. And then I'm gonna use a product expo. So this is gonna be New York, JavaSIG, and then the status is gonna be 1. Let me open. So what we're gonna do is just send this. This is gonna be a post method to create, and then we're gonna get the result here just to see if it's gonna work. The post method is not supported. So what did I do here? Post mapping. This is a post mapping. What I am doing incorrectly here. Okay, I can also add the value that I forgot about here. The post methods, and let me see if I can do this /products. Oh, that's why I didn't restart my server. This is why. So let me quickly restart. I always forget to do this. Okay, so it's restarted. Let me see. Okay, so now it has created the new record. Always remember to restart your server if you don't have the hot reload. So we have ID 15 here, and then we have our record. So it does work. We have our post mapping, and we also have our DTO over here. So this is another way that we can use records. Another thing that we can do, in case just if you are wondering, usually sometimes if you're working with pagination, or if you want to like just declare a temporary variable, one thing that we usually do here in Spring, whenever we don't want to create a new type, a new class, just to represent a type, we can use a hash map. So you just create your map, new hash map, and then you set your property and your value, and then you can return your object. So Spring also accepts that. But here, sometimes it's not really good whenever you're reading the code and you might not understand why the developer that was writing the code did that for the reasons. So what we can do here is also declare a record inside our code. So I can declare a record inside my controller. It doesn't need to be in a new file. And I can also declare a record inside my method. So if you need a temporary type, just so you can represent something in your code, you can also do that. So for example, if I create here record response, and then I have, let's say that we are declaring like a list of products. So this is the list, and then I want to have the total of the number of elements that we have in the list. I can do this, or if you want to, we can also pass this here. And then instead of the list product, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna return a response. So I have my temporary type here. And what we can do, I'm just gonna do here a var list. I'm gonna get my find all and assign to my list. And then we're gonna return a new response. So in my response, I'm just gonna send my list and then list.size, something like that. So we can also use, so in case if you have a temporary type that you wanna use, you can declare the scope of this, since this is not public or anything, it's gonna be only inside this class. So depending on the scenario that you have in your project, this might be useful for you to use. And just reminding you that you can also have this inside your method. So might be a good thing. Okay, so this is kind of the second example that we can use records, and I'm still bummed that I cannot use that with JPA. However, we still can handle database access with records, not by using JPA, but by using JDBC directly, which is fun. Sometimes you don't need all the power from JPA or Hibernate. All you need is just to select something from the database, and there are tons of projects that we usually encounter on the enterprise environment. So for example, you can have a batch job that's gonna read something from the database and it's gonna put it in a queue, or you have a job that's gonna receive information from a queue, and all you have to do is insert in the database. Or you have to retrieve information from the database and create a flat file. I mean, there are so many different scenarios where we can use those kind of, we can use JDBC templates directly without the need of JPA. So this is what I want to showcase you, and we're gonna come back here later and change our controller just so we can see how we can still use records and also other Java 14 functionalities. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna create here a product service. This is gonna be a class before I forget, because this is something that I always do. I'm just gonna annotate here with the service. And I have also added the Spring JDBC template, so we can also use it here. So I'm just gonna do just insert my JDBC template, and I'm just gonna use the template here. Template, this is also gonna be final, and I'm also gonna create a constructor, so we have this injected in this class. So first things first, what we're gonna do, let's see what we can do here. I'm gonna create another public. Let's see if we can create a product record. I'm gonna reuse that record that we have created in the beginning. And then find by ID. This is also gonna be a get mapping. However, what we're gonna use here is we're gonna pass the path variable, which is ID. And then we also have the path variable. This is gonna be an ID as well for now, just so it stops the compilation error. I'm just gonna put the return null here just for a second. Let's go back to the service. Let's go back to the service now, and we're gonna also do a public. We're gonna return the product record, and then we're gonna do a find by ID. Also, and then we're also gonna receive the integer ID here, and we're just gonna use the JDBC template so we can retrieve this information from the database. What we need here first is we're gonna need the template. So return the template. And then we're gonna run a query. So for this query, what we need first is a SQL statement. So what we'll do, we're gonna come back here. We're gonna declare a string. So this can also be final, and then we're gonna use our find by ID SQL. So we could just use a simple string. As I want to showcase you the text blocks, we're going to use text blocks for this, even though this is a pretty simple statement. So for text blocks, instead of one double quote, we're going to use 3 double quotes. So this is the way that we use it. And then here we can add anything that we want. So for example, select from and my table, which is product, and I can just enter. I can hit the enter key, and I can enter whatever I want to, where ID equals a parameter that we're gonna set up later. So this is what we can do. Again, this is very simple. We could have this in a single line, but usually whenever we're working with projects, we wanna specify all the columns that we are retrieving from the database, and then maybe we have more where clauses or more complex. And the text blocks, they are still strings, so we can concatenate them, and we can also use string methods in those. And just from the developer perspective, it's much more easier to read this code than having everything in a single line. Or sometimes I have done this already. We have a query inside a method, and if it's too big and you still want to keep the format in a good format, your source code, we use string builders, for example. Then you create a string builder, you add part of your SQL statement, and then you do an append and add the other part just so you can keep it readable. And this way we can have it at once and just one single variable without having to concatenate or even using string builders, which is great. So here, what we are going to do, we're going to do the find SQL. And we also need here the second parameter that we have here. We also need to pass the object, and which is our parameter here, ID, which we're going to map here. But we need to have an array. So new object array. And what we're going to do here is just pass the ID directly. And the way that we'll need, since we're not using JPA here, this product record is just the integer, the ID name status. We don't have anything mapping. We're also going to need a row mapper for this. So I'm going to come back here and I'm also going to create a row mapper. So here we can also create final and then row mapper. The row mapper, it's going to return a product record. Product record. Let me see the comments. Find by ID. Thank you very much for the typo. So the row mapper and then product record row mapper, or just the product row mapper over here. And then what we could do is just create the new row mapper with everything here. But since we're talking a little bit more about modern Java, we're going to use a Lambda expression here. So we're not going to use this. So I'm going to add my arrow, and then I'm just going to create here a product record. And here in my product record, I'm just going to add here. I need to add, this is missing, not this missing the, let me do this better. The product row mapper. Yeah, I'm just going to return now. This is the result set and then also the number. Let me do this in a way. First here and then here. Okay, now I can return my product record here. And then first what we're going to do is pass. This is a int, and this is the name of the column, which is the ID. And the name, it's a varchar. So this is a get string. Get string, and here I'm going to pass the name. And then we also have the get int, and then we're going to pass the status over here. Okay, so we have created our row mapper, and the last step is just pass the product row mapper. And yep, it's query for object, because this is not going to be only the query for object. Okay, so this is the correct methods. So now we have a find by ID, very simple, where we can return a record from the database. So we're going to go back to the controller. We're also going to inject the service here. So product service, I'm going to call it a service. And again, we're going to add this to the constructor. And now what we can do here is go back to the service and find by ID and pass the integer. So there we have it, a way to go to the database and return something. We could also do the find all method like that. Let's see if that's working. Don't forget to restart the server. Meanwhile, let me take a sip. Okay, and now we're gonna do a ID. So that was the 15. Let me see if the record that I have created before, now it's the 15. We're gonna send, and we have. Okay, so let me put this in the browser so we can see this message a little bit better. So this is the error that we're getting right now, and there is no return value type for the product record. This is a very common exception that you can get if you try to use records as a return type. And the reason for that is because the faster XML, the Jackson mapper that is being used by string internally to transform this object into a JSON, it's still not 100% ready for a Java 14. There is already an issue created on the GitHub repository for faster XML, but this is the last time that I saw the status, this was put in the future ideas. This is because the core of the mapper, right now, the minimum version that is required is Java 7. So if you're still using Java 7, you'll get the same code that is currently being used here in this project. And because there's a lot of companies that are still using Java 8, for example, I believe this is going to take a while. But given that we have a wonderful community, so the Java community, it's great. There are people already that are trying to add plugins or maybe trying to do pull requests to have this fixed. Because the Java 14 is not that old, so it was released a few months ago, it's not even 6 months old, and also because this record type, it's still in preview mode, it's not even a standard feature. I believe this is going to take a while. Maybe by the time that we have Java 17 being released, we're going to have a full support from the faster XML, the Jackson mapper for this. But what we can do for now is we can go to the product record and we can create the JSON property. So this is all that we need to add for the for every single record. And I forgot to show you that because if we go back, okay, let me try that again. Let me restart the server again. Let me see if I'm with time. Okay, so almost done. We can come back here. Okay, now we have the records. And if we try to get the all again, we're also going to have the same error. So if we go back to our controller, and we can also come here and also add the annotation to each and every one of these properties. And when we restart, we should be good. So just remember, in case if you are using the any record as a return type in Spring, and or any other framework that's using the faster XML, the Jackson mapper, as an internal mechanism or engine to transform your class into JSON or XML, you're gonna need this JSON. So now it's back and we're working again. So just remember that. The last thing that I want to showcase you here, just so we can see, because we haven't seen the switch expressions yet. And this is the last example that I want to show you. So we're also going to try to create something, because this is something that we usually get from JPA whenever we are inserting records into the database. We insert the record, and because, for instance, here on the product, we do have this ID. Usually after we call the save method, we get the ID that's already set on the object. So we're going to try to mimic and have something very similar. This is also to showcase sometimes it's not every time that you're going to need JPA. With a few lines of code, you can also achieve similar results if you don't need all that power in your project. So we're going to go back here to the service, and we're also going to create going to return a product record as well, and we're going to create a new record. And here we also need a name, and we also need the status. One thing that I mentioned in the beginning is we could create an enum for this. And this is what I'm going to do just so we can see the switch expressions in action. So here I'm going to come back and create a Java class here. So product status and an enum. And I'm just going to create active and inactive. Again, if this was a real project and if we're using enum, since we want to persist and store the number 0 for inactive and 1 for active in our database, we could create constructors for this enum, but we're not going to do that because we want to use the switch expressions where we'll be setting and assigning these values through the switch expression. So this is what I have. So instead of the int, I'm going to add the product status here. It's in the chat, everything's still okay. Okay, so for now, I'm just going to return no, just so we can stop seeing this compilation error. So what are we going to do? First things first, we have the product status that is going to be passed here. So we need to have the integer. So we're going to have the status code here instead. And what we want to do, we want to create a switch expression. So switch status, and then here we can have case. So as you can see, the IDE is already giving me the IntelliSense. So in case active, I'm going to return 1. And this is all that we had to do. So one thing, maybe you have seen this from Java 12, which was the first preview from the switch expressions. So if we needed to return something from the switch expressions, we could not do that before. What we had to do is probably create a variable and then something like this, have a var result, and then maybe assign 0 here. And then in case active, what we will do is just have result 1, and then we will add a break here, and then you will do the same thing for the inactive. But one thing that we can do right now is having the active instead of everything that we have here. We just use a Lambda expression, and then we can return our value. And because this is not a switch statement anymore, now it's a switch expression, we also need to add the comma here. So switch status that we have here, and also we need a case inactive and then 0. So this is saving a lot of lines of code for us, and this is something that I'm really excited to use in my projects, and also to avoid all those if-else statements. Since we can return this now, I'm sure that we can refactor a lot of code, removing if-else statements, and also a lot of variables that are not used. If we need to, we can also return this directly if that's the case, if that's the scenario. But now that we have our status code, we have the name, we have the status code now. So what we have to do now, we're gonna use, we're going to use 3 steps to create. First, we're going to run the template update, and that requires a few parameters. The first one is a prepare statement. So we're going to need a prepare statement creator. In order to do that, we're going to need a prepare statement creator factory. With the factory, we can set up all the arguments, the parameters that we need to send to our SQL script. And then we're going to set the values of the parameters in the prepare statement creator. And we're also going to need a key holder, because when we execute the update, passing the prepare statement and passing the key holder, what's going to happen internally is the key holder, it's going to get the value, which is the ID that was automatically generated by the database. And based on that key holder, we're going to have the ID. And then what we can do is, first option, we can create a new product record and setting all the constructor arguments, or we can use the find by ID method that we have created. So we have a couple of options here. So let's go first to the query that we have to create. Again, I'm going to use a template. So this is going to be the insert SQL. Again, a text block or a template string. Usually it's called how it's called in other languages. We're going to do insert into product. And here we're going to do the name and the status. And we're going to insert the values here. Again, if this was a very big query, this will be much better to see in the code. One thing that I did not mention is right now we have all this, it's formatted in a good way. But whenever we are running this code in the database, we don't need to have it this way. So we could have something like this. If you still want your string at the end to be like this, what we can do is just to enter some of the escape sequences. So the first one is the backlash. So what this is going to do, if you have it like this, whenever this is transformed to a string again, it's basically going to transform into this. So this is up to you. And there is also for the Java 13, it was keeping the spaces. So if you had like additional spaces at the end, so now for the Java 14, they have removed this behavior. And if you want to keep that, the spaces at the end, so what you have to do is just also use the escape sequence, the backslash, and the as. So it's up to you, whatever it's required for your project. Okay, so first things first, we're gonna first create our prepare statement creator factory. So let's go prepare statement creator factory. And here we're gonna create a prepared statement creator factory. Here we're gonna need to pass a few different things. The first thing, the first thing that we need is the SQL. Okay, so I have my search SQL here. The second thing is gonna be the parameters. So what we can do is just create a list of, and here we're gonna create 2 parameters because we need to. The first one is the name, the second one is the status. So this is gonna be a new SQL parameter, and this is gonna be types. This is gonna be varchar, and this is for the name. And then the second one that we need also, but this is gonna be in a type integer. So this is gonna be integer, and this is gonna be the status. And then we have the list here. I believe we have to import that. Okay, so that's done. And also what we need to pass here is an array that we're also gonna set a few things, right? So the first thing we're gonna do is to set the return, that's not here. Set the return, okay, I'm doing this wrong. Let me see what I have here. And this is what I do. Okay, and now I have here. So set the generated keys, because I want this. We're going to create a key holder later. And also what we're going to do, we're going to set the column names. In that case is ID. One of the question is if we can have default statements here as well on the switch case. Yes, we can. However, because I'm using an enum and here I have all my possible values, I don't need to have a default, but in case you have something like this, you could also have a default, and then you can add all your logic here. Also, this, what I'm doing here on the active one, it will be the same. For example, if I want to use a system out, or I can like log in something, I want to log something, and then I can return 0. So this will be the same thing. If I want, I can also do the default right here. So that's also a possibility. So let me go back. Okay. Now that we have our prepare statement creator factory, we need to create our prepare statement creator. And the way that we're going to do this, we're going to use our factory, and we're going to pass our creator. And all we have to do here is just pass the parameters. So I'm going to use another list of, and now we can set the name, and we can use the status code, because this is what we want to do. And before we execute this statement in the database, we need to get our key. So generated key, this is what we can do. And we're going to create a new generated key holder over here. And this guy right here, it's going to hold our key once we execute the update statement in our database. So now what we're going to do finally is run the update. So the update statement, we're going to pass a prepare statement creator. And the second parameter is going to be the generated key. So that's it. And the way that we're doing this, because there is one last feature from Java 14 that I haven't showed yet, which is the pattern matching for instance of. So the generated key. So this is gonna run a database. The generated key is gonna hold the key, as the name already says. So we're gonna get the key. And usually it depends on the database. In case of MySQL, because I have set this as an integer, it's gonna be the same thing as a long. This is gonna return a, excuse me, this is gonna return a big integer from the database. So instance of big integer. And this is what we would do. So we will declare a big integer ID, for example, and we will get the generated key dot get key. And we would also do the cast to the big integer. So now with the pattern matching, for instance, of, what we can do is remove this line. We don't need this anymore. And we can declare a variable right here. So this, what this is doing is exactly what we have here on line 62. So if this generated key is an instance of integer, it does declare the variable ID, and it already does the casting for us. One thing that is important to note, we can also have conditional. So if we have an expression here, we can have, for example, ID equals or int value equals 0, something like that. Let's say we want to have something like that. We can also have, the only thing we cannot have is with a or, because whenever we are trying to evaluate all these parts, the first one can be false. And in Java, only one of our expressions needs to be true in order to return a true in an or. So that's why this is not valid. But because of the end, what's going to happen is it only evaluates the second part of the expression if the first one is true. So that's the reason why. Okay, so if we have this, what we can do is up to you. So as I mentioned, you can do the return new product record, passing the ID, in that case, the int value, the name, the status code, and the status, like this, what the status code, yeah. The status code, or you can just call the find by ID that we have created over there. So, and here, if it doesn't work, it means something went wrong, and then could not create record, something like that. You could return, not return, but throw a new exception as well. So it's not a lot of code. It's a little bit more work than JPA, but let's give this a try. So for the create, what we're gonna do, we're gonna return a product record, and we're gonna return the service, and we're gonna create. We need to pass the product name, and we also need the product status. But again, we're gonna need a switch case. Let me quickly copy this. So we have over here, we're gonna have a switch case here, the status code. And again, we need, this is gonna be the product status active and inactive. And here, and it's gonna be the product dot status, and this is gonna be 1, and this is gonna be 0. The product status, yeah, and now because we're not covering all the values, the default here, I can also throw a new exception, throw new legal argument. Incorrect status or something like that. And here we also have the status code over here, and that should cover it. Okay, let's give this a try again. Again, I'm gonna restart my server. We're almost done. Gonna go back to Insomnia, and I'm gonna do a post. So I'm gonna do a 2 number here, and we're gonna send this. And again, it created the record 16. It means that this code has worked. So this again was a different way to use records. In that case, if you still wanna use records to represent your classes so you can persist them in the database, you can still use it. But then again, instead of using JPA/Hibernate, you have to use the JDBC directly. We have also seen the switch expressions here. We've also taken a look at the template strings, which are the text blocks. I keep calling it template strings. I don't know why. And also we took a look at the pattern matching of instance of. So we reviewed the 4 functionalities, 4 new features that we have from Java 14. So that is it. I can push this code to GitHub as well. One thing that I would like to show you here about the Java 15. So as I mentioned before, it's planned to be released on September, and the code that we have created here today is still valid for Java 15. You're not going to have a lot of difference in that. The only thing is that we have a second preview for records, and what's being added for records in Java 15 is because we're going to have a new Jdk Enhancement Proposal, which are the sealed classes, which is the 360 over here. So that's why the records are being enhanced, so it can also support the sealed classes. And text blocks is also going to be a standard feature. Until now, I haven't seen anything new. So whatever we know about text block, this is going to be for the standard feature. It was the same with the switch expressions. They introduced in the Java 12, and then Java 13, they have added the escape sequence. Was it? I think it was. No, it was for Java 14. So we had it for the Java 12 or 13, and then the Java 14, where it became a standard feature. And of course, we have much more things that are included in the Java 15, but for the language features, one that I'm also excited about are the sealed classes. It is worth taking a look at this. I'm also going to leave the link on the slides, and I'm going to post the slides on Twitter as well, so you have the link to this presentation. And I can also give you the source code for the I can also give you the source code for this presentation as well. After this presentation, what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna commit all my changes to my GitHub, and I'll leave a comment in the video here on YouTube, so you can get the code from GitHub from there. Well, I guess that's it. Thank you so much for everyone that was here with us during this streaming. Thank you so much for your time. And again, thank you to the organizers for having me today. And I hope you have enjoyed this, this example with Java 14. Thank you again.
Oh,
That was great. I have some questions I've been collecting on behalf of the audience. You got a lot of them, but people did manage to sneak some questions about you when you were coding. The first question is, are records immutable?
Yes, they are. That's the reason we cannot use them with JPA/Hibernate. So because each of the attributes of the properties are final, yes, they are immutable.
Okay. We had some questions about also records. Can record types take another record as an argument? Someone said yes. And what if we need custom and hash code and equals? You can override them. Is there anything you want to say on either of those two?
No, that's correct. We can override. By default, it's going to create the toString equals hash code. You can always override them, and it can receive any type, because at the end of the day, they are just classes that extend the record type. So you can have any type of attributes in there.
Okay, we have 2 more questions about records and then a new topic. Are records by default serializable?
Yeah, you can have them. Yep.
Okay, and would the record that you created have package access?
The one that I did create, I don't think. Okay, let me try this right now. So this
And
is
a note for the people posting questions. So the guy who posted in Portuguese, I hope you don't want that asked out loud.
He's just asking for a shout out to the Sou Java Brasilia. So shout out to everyone from the Sou Java in Brazil. Okay, let me see right here. So we will need a controller, product controller. Let me quickly create this. We can test this. We would not be able to use this as a, what's the name again? Response. So response. So yeah, I mean a product controller response. So yeah, that will be, you can still access that. So yes, to answer the question.
And also on records, do you know if records can implement an interface?
Yes, it cannot extend because they are final and because they are already extending the record class, they cannot extend any other class. However, you can implement as many interfaces as you want to. So go crazy on the interfaces.
Our next question is hands-on. Can you show how IntelliJ you set up preview features be enabled?
Sure. So here in IntelliJ, what you're gonna do, if you create a new project, you just go to the project structure, and it's gonna be very similar if you're using Eclipse and NetBeans as well. And VS Code uses it by default. So in your project settings, you go to project. Hope you can see this. You select what's the version. You can also go to Java 15. So it's going to be the same thing once Java 15 is released. So we have Java 14 over here. And then by default, what you're going to have is just the JDK version without the preview feature. So if you do create a new project nowadays, you have to go to the settings and then select the preview version. Same thing with Eclipse. And then you just click OK and apply, and you're good to go.
Thank you. On the topic of switch statements, can you talk about why it's not a backward compatibility issue to keep the existing switch statement while adding switch expressions?
So switch statements and switch expressions, I see them as two different things, right? We're still using a very similar syntax. So let's go back here and do again, you can have like a switch and have the status right here. And let me see, case active. You could have what we had out of here. Let's see, var result. This is going to be null. And then with the record, I can have like a result assigning number 1. And I will need the break if I don't want to go to the case inactive. And well, I guess you're just result 0, and then also the break. And of course, you can always have your default case as well. So these are what we call the switch statements. This is very similar to what we have an if, a for, while. So this is just a statement that we have in the source code, just a block of code, right? And this is kind of an expression. One thing that you're going to notice here that we also use the semicolon over here, because again, this is an expression, will be something like we did here. This will be also some kind of expression that is returning a value, which is different from the statement itself. You can have both in your code. I guess I need to assign something here. You can have both in your code. If you start using Java 13, Java 12, 13, 14, and onwards, you're still going to be able to have all your switch statements. So they are two different things in your code. Okay. Hope that answers the question.
That was great. Thank you. To the folks on YouTube, we're almost nearing the end of questions. So if you have any more, last call, type in your questions. My next question in the question cache is, can you say anything about sealed classes?
Sealed classes, so usually just a gist of it. We can open the Java 15 so you can see. But basically what it is, suppose you have an interface. What it basically does, you're going to tell your interface what are the classes that can implement that interface. That's basically it. Of course, there is more into it, but that's the reason that we have over here. Let me see. That's usually, oh, here. This is a public sealed. So you're sealing the class shape. So only the circle, rectangle, square, and so on. We're gonna be able to implement this class over here or extend. This is going to be great, especially for people that work developing Java libraries. And sometimes, depending on the design pattern that you're also using a project, this is another use that I see. Sometimes you just use a class in not in the correct way or not in the way that it was designed in the first place. And this is going to prevent that, because you're just going to seal, and you'll have to declare what are the classes that are going to be able to use your class.
There was a lively discussion in the chat about Spring and dependency injection. Do you have anything you'd like to share about that topic?
One thing that when I mentioned the dependency injection for Spring, because I don't use the auto wired, I don't know if this what the discussion about. So usually what people are gonna do, they're not gonna use in the constructor, they're gonna just create the auto wire here, and that's it, right? But I believe since Spring 2.5 or Spring 3, I don't remember the version, I saw this in the documentation.
Spring a long time ago?
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
At this point, the version number doesn't matter.
So basically what it says is if it is a mandatory injection, if you really need that in that dependency in order to be able to use your class, the best practice will be to do the injection through the constructor, not through the setter method, which is what uses the outer wire part. Because in the constructor, you're kind of gonna make sure that you have the instance of the class after the class is instantiated, as when you have the outer wire, it's going to use, I believe, I'm not sure if I'm talking gibberish, but I hope I'm not. It's going to use the setter method and instead. So it kind of like an optional dependency. So in case if it's optional, you can use the auto wired. In case it's a mandatory one, you should use the constructor. Of course, I have tons of projects that are using the auto wired. I never had an issue before, but that's just the best practice that we have on the documentation.
We're down to our last two questions. The second to last question, are you aware of any changes to garbage collection?
I've noticed there were some in the latest releases. I believe there are some for Java 15 as well. I mean, there are tons of, whenever there are different, okay, let me go back to my, go up. Okay. So if we take a look here at the OpenJDK website, you're gonna see a lot of these projects, right? So we have Ember, I believe, is a project for the language enhancements, but we have a lot of other projects as well. And usually within each JDK that is released, there is a little bit of every area, like the library tools, things that are being removed, and also for the JVM. And sometimes there are also enhancements for the garbage collection. Garbage collector, but I'm not, I don't remember from the top of my head right now anything specific, because it's usually something that I don't go that deep.
Okay, and the last area of expertise is, are there any features in Java 15 that you're particularly excited about?
Records will be one, since it's going to be, it's a second preview, it's not going to be a standard feature anymore. Maybe Java 16. But the Sioux classes seem something that it's really cool. And the other one will be the hidden classes. The hidden class is also something nice, but I'm seeing it using more by developers that were creating libraries for the JavaX system instead of more like a corporate enterprise projects.
And that completes our Q&A. I turn it over to Rodrigo.
All right, thank you, Jean. I would like to thank, in the name of NYJavaSIG, everyone that attended this event tonight. Thank you, Loyani. Thank you for all our participants. Just one last thing. We're gonna have a meeting, then our next meeting will be on June 17th. It's a different time. We always do our event 6:30 New York time, so it's gonna be 5 p.m. So next Wednesday, June 17th, 5 p.m. We're going to be talking about the JSR 381, the visual recognition for Java. It's a Java-friendly machine learning API. So super fun topic, super excited. Frank Greco will be one of the speakers, along with Zoran Sivrak and Kevin Branson. So please follow us on the YouTube and Twitter. Twitter will be announcing, I always mess up with the sites. So Twitter, we're gonna be announcing the events, the subscription link, and everything else. All right, so the name of NYJavaSIG, thank you everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.